I flew 16 hours straight from Tokyo just to watch my sister get married. But when I stepped out of my car at the venue, my own parents blocked the iron gates. They told me I did not fit the aesthetic and ordered me to leave before I embarrassed them in front of her new wealthy in-laws. So I turned around and walked away in silence. 5 days later, my mother called me screaming because her credit card had just been charged $49,000 for the wedding venue. She demanded I fix the glitch immediately. I simply laughed and told her she did not understand who she was renting from. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your peace. The humidity of the Georgia Lowcountry clung to my skin the moment my driver opened the door of the black SUV. I was running on absolute fumes. I had just spent the last 16 hours in a pressurized cabin flying back from a brutal but highly successful corporate acquisition in Tokyo. Jet lag was pulling at the corners of my eyes and my body ached for sleep, but I pushed it all down. Today was not about my fatigue or my business empire. Today was about my younger sister Jada. I stood before the towering wrought iron gates of the Monarch estate, holding a custom handcrafted crystal vase I had commissioned from an artisan in Japan. It was delicate and beautiful, everything Jada claimed to value. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal pantsuit, taking a deep breath of the air thick with the scent of jasmine and Spanish moss. I knew my outfit was a stark contrast to the pastel, hyper-traditional Southern aesthetic my family was obsessed with projecting. But I was not there to play dress-up. I was there to show up for my sister on the most important day of her life. Growing up, Jada and I had never been close. She was the pageant, polished golden child, deeply insecure, but constantly validated by our parents. I was the stubborn black sheep who kept her head down and worked. We had drifted miles apart, but a foolish part of my heart believed that standing by her side today might bridge the gap. I wanted to believe that family meant something more than appearances. I took exactly 3 steps toward the manicured courtyard before 2 figures stepped out from the shade of a massive live oak tree. It was my mother Valerie and my father Deandre. They did not look like parents rushing to welcome their eldest daughter home from a trip halfway across the world. They looked like security guards intercepting a trespasser. My mother stopped a few feet in front of me, her eyes performing a slow, agonizingly critical sweep from the tips of my leather loafers to the neat bun at the nape of my neck. Her face twisted into a mask of pure disdain. "What are you doing here looking like that?" my mother hissed, keeping her voice low so it would not carry across the pristine lawns. "You are wearing a dark pantsuit to a sterling family event. Do you have any idea how hard we have worked to make this day perfect?" I stared at her, the exhaustion suddenly feeling much heavier. "I flew 16 hours to be at my sister's wedding," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I am family." My father stepped forward, crossing his arms over his expensive tuxedo. "You are not walking into that courtyard looking like you are about to audit someone, Kendra. Preston's family is old money from Charleston. They have expectations. We told them our eldest daughter was doing charity work overseas. We told them you were building schools or something noble, so they would not ask questions." The words hit me like a physical strike to the chest. Charity work. They had completely erased my life to fit their narrative. They genuinely believed I was still just a low-level hospitality scheduler struggling to make ends meet in Atlanta. They had no idea I was the chief executive officer of a luxury real estate and hospitality group. I had kept my success quiet for years, specifically because of moments like this, because I knew they only valued things they could brag about or exploit. But hearing my father admit that my actual existence was a source of shame to them was a different kind of pain. "You lied to her new in-laws about where I am?" I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You hid me away because you think my job is an embarrassment." My mother adjusted her diamond necklace, looking entirely unbothered by her own cruelty. "We protected Jada's aesthetic," she corrected smoothly. "The Sterlings are elite. They do not need to know that Jada's sister schedules catering staff for a living. You being here throws off the entire dynamic. We cannot have them looking down on us." Before I could formulate a response to that staggering level of disrespect, the heavy oak doors of the main estate house swung open. Jada stepped out. She looked undeniably stunning in a custom ivory gown that hugged every curve, her hair styled in flawless waves. For a fraction of a second, I felt a swell of sisterly pride. But then her eyes found me standing near the gates. The radiant smile she had been wearing vanished instantly. She did not wave. She did not walk over to greet me. Instead, she physically recoiled as if she had just spotted a stray dog wandering onto the property. "Mom, what is she doing here?" Jada hissed loudly enough for the sound to carry over the trickling water of the nearby fountain. "I told you I did not want her ruining the photos. Get rid of her before Preston's mother comes outside." My own sister. The girl I had stayed up late tutoring, the girl whose tears I had wiped away when she lost her high school pageants, was looking at me with absolute revulsion. She did not care that I had crossed an ocean for her. She only cared that my dark suit clashed with her carefully curated pastel fantasy. My father took a step closer to me, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You heard your sister, Kendra. Only family that fits the aesthetic is allowed today. You were not invited. Jada did not even put a chair out for you at the reception. Leave right now before you cause a scene and ruin this for all of us." I looked from my father to my mother, and finally to Jada, who was glaring at me from the steps of the estate. I waited for the tears to come, for the familiar sting of rejection that had plagued my childhood to rise up and choke me. But it did not happen. Instead, a profound, chilling clarity washed over me. I looked at the beautiful crystal vase in my hands, a gift meant for a sister who loved me. But the woman standing on those steps was a stranger. They were all strangers. I did not scream. I did not beg for a seat at their table. I did not try to convince them of my worth or tell them about the empire I had built. They did not deserve to know the woman I had become. I slowly lowered my arms and let the gift bag slip from my fingers. It hit the dirt driveway with a heavy thud, the sound of the delicate crystal inside, shattering, echoing softly in the humid air. I looked my parents dead in the eye one last time, turned my back on them, and walked to my waiting SUV. I slid into the cool leather seat of the car and told my driver to take me back to Atlanta. As the vehicle pulled away, I watched the towering iron gates of the Monarch estate close behind me in the rearview mirror. I leaned my head against the tinted glass, watching the Spanish moss blur past the window. My phone remained silent in my pocket. No apologies, no texts asking me to come back, just absolute silence. By the time the SUV hit the highway, the wounded sister inside me had vanished entirely, replaced by the ruthless executive who had clawed her way to the top of the luxury hospitality industry. My family had just shown me exactly who they were and where I stood in their lives. They had made their choice based on an illusion of wealth and status they were desperately trying to project. What they did not realize, what they could not possibly have known as they chased their Charleston elite fantasy, was that I was not just a guest they had turned away. I was the owner of the very ground they were standing on, and they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about the true cost of disrespect. The silence of my Atlanta penthouse was a stark contrast to the heavy heat and hostility I had just left behind in the Lowcountry. I walked through the front door, kicked off my leather loafers, and let the sheer quiet of the space wash over me. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a glittering testament to the heights I had reached while my family was busy looking down on me. I did not cry. I did not pour myself a glass of wine and wallow. Instead, I walked into my kitchen, brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, and made a conscious decision to go completely radio silent. For the next 5 days, I became a ghost. I did not send a single text message to my mother. I did not call my father to demand an explanation. I certainly did not reach out to Jada. I simply sat back, drank my coffee, and watched the entire charade unfold in real time through the glowing screen of my phone. Instagram became my window into their meticulously curated fantasy. Jada had created a custom wedding hashtag, and I followed it with the cold detachment of an auditor reviewing a fraudulent ledger. The posts started flooding in by Friday evening. There was Jada radiant and dripping in designer labels posing next to Preston. Preston with his perfectly coiffed sandy blonde hair, his tailored navy blazer, and that relaxed smile that only comes from generations of old Charleston money. He looked blissfully unaware of the toxic reality of the people he was marrying into. He had no idea that the wealthy elite in-laws he thought he was acquiring were actually putting on the performance of a lifetime. By Saturday, the digital spectacle reached its peak. I sat on my velvet sofa swiping through endless stories and posts documenting the main event. My family was pulling out all the stops to impress the Sterlings. The ceremony took place in the grand gardens of the monarch estate. I watched a sweeping video of the aisle lined with thousands of imported white roses leading up to the historic gazebo. I knew exactly how much those roses cost, because I was the one who had negotiated the vendor contract for the estate 2 years ago. Then came the reception in the grand ballroom. Jada posted a live video spinning around the dance floor. The crystal chandeliers caught the light, beautifully illuminating the Italian marble floors and the towering floor-to-ceiling draped windows. It was a breathtaking venue. I should know, considering I had personally approved the architectural blueprints and selected the lighting fixtures. Seeing my family dance on the very floors I owned, while actively pretending I did not exist, was a surreal experience. They spared no expense, confident that the friends and family waiver I had quietly attached to their booking would cover their lavish tastes. I watched a slow-motion clip of Jada and Preston cutting into a massive 7-tier wedding cake adorned with edible gold leaf and cascading sugar flowers. Next came the videos of the midnight fireworks display, reflecting over the estate's private lake, illuminating the sky in brilliant bursts of color. It was the epitome of Southern luxury, exactly the kind of high society event my parents had always dreamed of hosting. But it was the captions that truly revealed the depth of their delusion. I clicked on a photo my mother had posted. It featured Valerie and DeAndre standing flanking Jada and Preston. My parents were dressed to the nines, smiling with practiced elegance, projecting the image of a deeply supportive, affluent African-American dynasty, welcoming a wealthy white son-in-law into their fold. The caption beneath my mother's photo read, "So incredibly blessed to give my youngest daughter the luxury she deserves on her special day. Nothing is too good for our Jada. Welcome to the family, Preston." I read those words 3 times, giving my youngest the luxury she deserves. The audacity of the statement was almost impressive. My mother was publicly claiming credit for a multi-thousand-dollar luxury experience that she had not paid a single dime for. She was basking in the praise of her social circle and the Sterling family, accepting compliments on her exquisite taste and generosity. They were all playing the part of elite aristocrats, completely insulated by the belief that I would just absorb their disrespect and let them enjoy their free ride. They thought I was just a lowly hospitality scheduler who had somehow begged her boss to secure a venue discount. They believed my silence over these 5 days meant I was sitting in a cramped apartment somewhere crying over being excluded from their perfect aesthetic. They relied on my historical tendency to keep my head down and avoid conflict. They thought I would swallow the humiliation at the gates to keep the peace, just as I had swallowed every other insult they had thrown my way since childhood. I set my phone face down on the marble coffee table and leaned back, letting the quiet of my penthouse settle around me once more. The anger that had sparked at the gates of the estate had completely cooled into something much more dangerous. It was no longer about hurt feelings or a desire for their acceptance. It was about accountability. I had spent my entire life shrinking myself so they could feel big. I had hidden my wealth and my corporate empire because I knew they would either try to exploit it or tear it down. But their behavior at the wedding proved that shrinking myself had not protected me. It had only emboldened them. They wanted luxury. They wanted to play in the big leagues and impress old money. They wanted to pretend they could afford the lifestyle of the elite while treating the actual owner of the estate like dirt on their expensive shoes. I picked up my coffee mug, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The digital detox had served its purpose. It had given them exactly enough rope to hang themselves with their own grand illusions. The wedding weekend was over, the guests were heading home, and the newlywed couple was likely preparing for their extravagant honeymoon. The show had concluded. Now it was time for the bill to arrive. I swiped to the next photo on Jada's timeline, and my thumb froze over the screen. The image showed my sister and Preston standing beneath a massive, breathtaking floral arch. It was a cascading masterpiece of imported white orchids, rare blush peonies and lush hydrangeas that framed the historic gazebo of the estate perfectly. The caption underneath read that it was a bespoke design custom ordered to bring a touch of Charleston elegance to the Georgia venue. I did not need to read the caption to know the details. I knew exactly how many stems were in that arrangement, and more importantly, I knew the exact price. I was the one who had negotiated the exclusive contract with that particular botanical vendor 2 years ago. That single floral arch cost $10,000. $10,000 for flowers that would inevitably wilt and be thrown into the compost bins within 48 hours. I stared at the pristine white petals on my screen, and the sheer extravagance of it pulled me violently backward in time. The glittering skyline outside my penthouse window faded away, replaced by the suffocating memory of the cramped linoleum-floored kitchen in my parents' old house in South Fulton. It was 10 years ago. I was 25 years old, exhausted from working double shifts at a mid-tier hotel, but buzzing with a vision I could no longer ignore. I had spent 6 grueling months researching market trends, analyzing property values, and drafting a comprehensive 50-page business plan for a boutique hospitality management firm. I had printed it on thick, high-quality paper and placed it in a sleek black binder. That binder represented my ticket out of mediocrity. It was the blueprint for the empire I currently owned. But to get it off the ground, I needed a small commercial startup loan, just $5,000. Because my credit history was thin at the time the bank required a co-signer. I remember sitting across the kitchen table from Valerie and DeAndre. The smell of bleach and stale coffee hung in the air. My heart pounded against my ribs as I slid that black binder across the table toward my father. I pitched my heart out. I explained the revenue projections, the target demographics, and how I planned to scale the business within the first 3 years. I promised them they would not have to pay a single dime out of pocket. I just needed their signature to secure the funding. I told them this was my chance to build real wealth, to create a legacy for our family name. DeAndre did not even open the cover. He looked at the binder, then looked at me and let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed off the kitchen cabinets. He reached for his coffee mug and set it down directly on top of my business plan, leaving a wet brown ring on the pristine cover. A hospitality empire, he had chuckled, shaking his head. Kendra, please. That is a ghetto fantasy. You watch too many television shows about self-made billionaires. People from our neighborhood do not own luxury estates. We do not rub elbows with the elite. You need to stop dreaming and apply for that shift manager position at the hotel. It pays $15 an hour and it has a dental plan. That is real life. I looked to my mother, desperately hoping for a shred of support. But Valerie just crossed her arms and offered me a look of profound pity. You always try to be something you are not. Kendra, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. You make people uncomfortable with all this aggressive ambition. It is not attractive. You should take a page out of Jada's book. She knows how to present herself. She knows how to attract the right kind of people. Hospitality is for people who serve, not people who own. Stay in your lane before you embarrass yourself and drag our credit scores down with you. The rejection stung a sharp and suffocating pain that made it hard to breathe. They had looked at my ambition and diagnosed it as a character flaw. I took my stained binder, walked back to my bedroom, and cried out of pure frustration. But the true betrayal, the wound that fundamentally severed my emotional connection to my parents, did not happen that night at the kitchen table. It happened 12 hours later. The next morning, I walked downstairs to get a glass of water before heading to my shift at the hotel. I stopped in the hallway just outside the kitchen. Jada, who was 19 at the time, was prancing around the kitchen island holding a glossy brochure for the Miss Georgia Heritage pageant. She was complaining loudly that if she wanted to win, she needed a custom gown, professional hair and makeup teams, and a specialized vocal coach for the talent portion. I watched as my father, the same man who had just mocked my business plan as a ghetto fantasy, pulled his checkbook out of his briefcase without a second of hesitation. He asked her exactly how much she needed to secure the crown. Jada calculated the costs out loud. $2,000 for the entry fees and coaching, and $4,000 for the custom beaded gown she had seen in a boutique in Buckhead. $6,000 in total. Anything for my princess! DeAndre had said, his voice brimming with absolute pride. Valerie stood by the stove, beaming at her youngest daughter. "We are going to make sure you look like absolute royalty, Jada. This is an investment in your future. Once you have that crown, the doors to high society will swing wide open for you." I stood frozen in the shadows of the hallway, listening to the crisp sound of my father tearing a $6,000 check from his registry. The sound sliced through the quiet morning air like a blade. They had the money. They always had the money. It was never about the financial risk, and it was never about protecting their credit scores. They simply did not want to invest in me. They viewed my intelligence and my entrepreneurial drive as a threat to their narrow image-obsessed worldview. But they viewed Jada's superficial pageantry, her desperate need for external validation and proximity to wealth, as a legitimate investment in their own social climbing. They refused to risk $5,000 on a business plan that eventually built a multi-million-dollar corporation, but they gleefully handed over $6,000 for a rhinestone crown and a dress she would only wear once. Sitting in my penthouse now, a decade later, I stared at the photo of Jada and Preston kissing beneath that $10,000 floral arch. The profound irony of the situation settled deep into my bones. My parents had spent their entire lives grooming Jada to marry into the Charleston elite so they could finally feel like they belonged to the upper echelon of society. They had mocked my ambition to own luxury real estate, telling me to stay in my lane and accept my place as a worker. Yet here they were throwing the social event of the decade on a property I owned, surrounded by luxury vendors I employed, utilizing a venue discount I provided. They had tried to bury my potential because it did not fit their aesthetic. Now they were unknowingly using the fruits of my labor to finance their grand illusion. The 5 days of digital silence were up. I closed the Instagram application and opened the direct portal to my company's financial operations division. I had given them the grace of enjoying the weekend. I had let them take their photos, eat their cake, and bask in the applause of the Sterling family. But the party was officially over. I tapped the screen and initiated the billing sequence. It was time for Valerie and DeAndre to finally pay for their aesthetic. My finger hovered over the execute button on my tablet. The final billing sequence for the Monarch estate was queued up, waiting for my authorization to hit Valerie and DeAndre's credit card. A cynical, icy smile tugged at the corner of my mouth as I stared at the screen. I took a slow sip of my coffee, wondering for a brief moment how it was even mathematically possible for them to be this blind. How does an entire family remain completely oblivious to the fact that their own flesh and blood owns one of the most lucrative hospitality and real estate groups in the Southeast? The answer was simple but devastating. They chose not to know. It took my mind back to a stifling, humid Sunday afternoon 3 years ago. I rarely attended their mandatory family dinners in South Fulton anymore, but I had made an exception that day. I had just signed the deed on my third major commercial acquisition, a historic downtown property that officially tipped my net worth into the 8-figure bracket. I was buzzing with a quiet, powerful adrenaline. I wanted to share my triumph. I wanted, just for a moment, to sit at a table with my own parents and have them look at me with a fraction of the pride they reserved entirely for Jada. I walked into their dining room wearing a sharp emerald green blazer and crisp trousers. The house smelled heavily of fried chicken, collard greens, and the suffocating tension that always hung in the air whenever I entered a room. Valerie was pulling a tray of macaroni and cheese out of the oven, complaining loudly about her back. DeAndre was sitting at the head of the table polishing his watch. Jada was seated to his right, aggressively tapping the screen of her phone with her freshly manicured acrylic nails. I took a seat near the end of the table, waiting for the right moment. Halfway through the meal, during a rare lull in the complaints and local gossip, I put my fork down and took a deep breath. "I actually have some incredible news," I announced, keeping my voice steady but warm. "I just closed on a massive commercial property in Midtown. I am officially expanding my portfolio into luxury corporate leasing." DeAndre did not even look up from his plate. He chewed his food slowly, swallowed, and held up his hand. His palm faced me like a traffic cop halting an annoying pedestrian. "Hold that thought, Kendra," he said, his tone dripping with patronizing authority. "Jada has something important to share with the table today. Go ahead, princess." I froze, the excitement dying instantly in my chest. Jada sat up perfectly straight, flipping her long bundles of hair over her shoulder. She looked around the table with a smug, manufactured humility. "I got the job," she squealed, clapping her hands together. "I am officially a junior marketing coordinator for a boutique cosmetics brand in Buckhead." Valerie literally dropped the serving spoon back into the bowl with a loud clatter. She rushed around the table and threw her arms around Jada's neck, screaming and praising God, as if Jada had just been appointed to the Supreme Court. DeAndre pushed his chair back violently, walked over to the kitchen counter, and popped a bottle of cheap sparkling cider he had apparently been chilling specifically for this moment. "A corporate marketing executive," my father announced proudly, pouring the fizzing cider into the imitation crystal glasses my mother reserved for special occasions. "My youngest daughter is conquering the corporate world. I always knew you were destined for the top floor, Jada." I sat there in absolute stunning silence. A junior coordinator role at a mid-tier brand meant she was an entry-level employee. She would be fetching coffee and organizing spreadsheets for $45,000 a year. There was absolutely nothing wrong with honest entry-level work, but the sheer delusional disproportion of their reaction was staggering. I had just acquired a multi-million-dollar commercial asset. I was actively employing dozens of people. I was building generational wealth for our family name. Yet I was treated like an interruption. After 20 agonizing minutes of listening to Valerie and DeAndre obsess over Jada's new morning commute, her upcoming wardrobe changes, and the exact square footage of her future cubicle, I tried one final time. "That is a great stepping stone, Jada," I said, forcing a polite and supportive tone. "As I was saying earlier, my new property acquisition actually means I will be hiring a full marketing department for my own firm very soon. If you ever want to sit down and discuss corporate strategy, I would be happy to mentor you." The temperature in the dining room plummeted to freezing. Valerie stopped pouring her second glass of cider and glared at me across the table. Her eyes narrowed into slits of profound irritation. "Kendra, please," she snapped, her voice sharp as glass. "Can you let your sister have her moment for once in your miserable life? It is not always about you and your little side hustles." DeAndre pointed his fork directly at my chest, his face hardening into a scowl. "Your mother is right, he reprimanded me. "Managing properties for some rich landlord is a fine job, Kendra. It pays your bills and keeps you off the streets. But Jada is entering the real corporate arena. She is going to be sitting in boardrooms with important people. Do not try to compare your little property management gigs to her career. You need to learn how to be supportive instead of constantly competing with a sister who is clearly out of your league." That was the exact moment the final heavy lock clicked into place in my mind. The realization washed over me like ice water. They did not just misunderstand what I did for a living. They actively and aggressively rewrote reality to ensure I remained trapped beneath them. They heard the words property acquisition and immediately downgraded it in their minds to managing properties for some rich landlord. They could not fathom, nor would they ever accept, a reality where I was the rich landlord. If I was recognized as a highly successful chief executive officer, it would completely shatter the fragile, toxic ecosystem of our family. Valerie and DeAndre desperately needed to be the superior, benevolent saviors. Jada needed to be the untouchable, glamorous star. For that twisted dynamic to survive, I had to be the bitter, struggling black sheep. My wealth, my intelligence, and my success were direct threats to their entire identity. So they built a massive fortress of willful ignorance to keep the truth out. They intentionally blinded themselves to my empire because seeing me clearly meant admitting they were ordinary. I stopped trying to tell them anything after that Sunday dinner. I let them believe whatever made them comfortable. I let them think my tailored designer suits were just a pathetic attempt to look important. I let them believe my quiet demeanor was shame, rather than calculated observation. I let them live in their handcrafted delusion, because it was safer for my empire to grow in the shadows of their ignorance. I blinked, pulling myself out of the memory, and looked back at the glowing screen of my tablet. They had spent years desperately keeping me in a box, convinced I was nothing more than a minor embarrassment they had to manage. Now that same blinding arrogance had led them straight into a financial bear trap they could not escape. They had danced in my grand ballroom, eaten from my catering kitchens, and signed forged liability documents under my roof, all because they refused to see me. My fingers stopped hovering. I pressed the screen authorizing the $49,000 charge to Valerie and DeAndre's account. I locked my tablet, leaned back in my leather chair, and waited for the explosion. The heavy oak doors of my corner office swung open, breaking the silence I had wrapped around myself for the past 5 days. Malik walked in, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. He wore a sharp charcoal suit that mirrored my own business attire, his posture radiating the kind of effortless authority that took years to cultivate. Malik was not just my chief operating officer. He was the architect of my operational success, my fiercest protector, and my best friend. We had built this empire shoulder to shoulder, navigating the treacherous waters of commercial real estate and luxury hospitality when nobody else believed in our vision. He walked across the expansive room, his leather shoes silent against the thick carpet, and took a seat in the velvet chair across from my mahogany desk. He placed a sleek silver tablet down between us. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not offer empty platitudes about family. He knew me too well for that. He simply looked at me, his dark eyes sharp and assessing. "The cleanup crews have finished at the Monarch Estate," Malik said, his voice calm and professional. "The venue is completely secured. The vendors have packed up the floral arches. The catering teams have cleared the kitchens, and the final guest departed exactly 1 hour ago. The property is officially vacant." I nodded, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, watching the busy streets of Buckhead below. I had spent the last 5 days watching my family celebrate on my property, drinking my imported champagne and dancing under my crystal chandeliers. I had given them every opportunity to reach out, to apologize, to acknowledge my existence. Instead, they had posted photos bragging about their wealth and status, completely blind to the reality that they were playing house in my kingdom. I turned my attention back to Malik. He pulled up the billing dashboard on his tablet, his fingers hovering over the screen. He knew exactly what was loaded into the system. Months ago, against my better judgment, I had quietly logged into the corporate booking software and attached a premier 100% discount code to the Sterling and Adams wedding file. It was a comprehensive friends and family waiver. It erased the heavy venue fee, the exorbitant catering costs, and the luxury vendor premiums. It brought their total balance down to absolute zero. That waiver was supposed to be my wedding gift to Jada. It was meant to be a quiet, dignified olive branch, a way to show my family that despite their constant criticism and rejection, I was still willing to provide for them. I had wanted to give them the Southern aristocratic fantasy they so desperately craved, completely free of charge. But standing at those iron gates, looking at the disgust in my sister's eyes, and hearing my father banish me from the premises, that olive branch had snapped into jagged splinters. They had made it undeniably clear that I was not family. And in the world of luxury hospitality, non-family members do not receive the family discount. I reached out and pulled the tablet across the polished mahogany surface of my desk. I reviewed the final itemized receipt. It detailed the 7-tier cake, the imported white orchids, the fireworks display, and the premium open bar. It was a masterpiece of excess. I looked at the credit card on file. My parents had put down Valerie's card for the final incidentals, foolishly assuming the primary balance was completely wiped out by my silent intervention. They had also uploaded a liability and damages contract, which Malik had flagged earlier in the week. I slid the tablet back across the desk toward Malik. I looked him dead in the eye, my voice devoid of any hesitation or regret. "The Sterling and Adams wedding party just checked out," I said smoothly. "Revoke the friends and family waiver on the account. Issue the standard invoice." Malik leaned back in his chair. A slow, deeply satisfied smirk spread across his face. He knew exactly what this meant. He knew the financial devastation this would rain down upon people who had spent a decade treating me like a failure. He did not question my directive. He did not ask if I was absolutely sure. He simply picked up the tablet. "Consider it done," he replied. "The system is updating now. The total balance being pushed to the card on file is exactly $49,000. Do you want me to process the charge immediately?" "Process it," I commanded. "And set the billing parameters to automatically issue a formal demand for payment if the card declines. They want to play the role of high society elites. Let them pay high society prices. Malik tapped the screen with a sharp, decisive motion. The trap was officially set. The digital wheels were in motion, carrying a massive financial blow directly toward Valerie and DeAndre. We sat in the quiet of the office as the system executed the command. Malik crossed his legs, resting his hands on his knee. "You know this is going to trigger a catastrophic meltdown," he said, his tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "They are going to realize the card cannot handle a $49,000 charge. They are going to panic. They are going to try to dispute it, and when they do, they are going to expose the fact that they forged Preston's signature on those liability waivers just to bypass the deposit requirements." I nodded, a cold sense of justice settling over me. They dug their own grave, Malik. They forged a contract to impress a wealthy son-in-law, assuming they would never actually have to pay the bill because they thought they could just walk all over me in secret. They wanted the aesthetic of wealth without the accountability. Now they get both. Malik stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He offered me a respectful nod. "I will monitor the accounts from my office. The moment the charge hits their bank, the automated fraud alerts are going to start flying. Keep your phone close, Kendra. The fallout is going to be spectacular." I watched Malik leave the office, the heavy doors closing softly behind him. I turned my chair back towards the windows, gazing out over the city I had conquered. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the glass buildings of Atlanta. My pulse was steady. My mind was crystal clear. For 35 years, I had absorbed their insults, their shame, and their relentless demands to shrink myself. I had let them cast me as the socially unfit, embarrassing failure of the family. But the narrative was no longer in their control. I had stripped away the safety net they did not even know I was providing. The digital detox was over. The silence was about to be broken. I placed my phone on the desk right in front of me, staring at the blank screen, waiting for the inevitable moment my mother would realize her carefully constructed world was completely collapsing. It took exactly 17 minutes. The sleek black surface of my phone buzzed against the mahogany desk, shattering the quiet of my office. The caller ID flashed my mother's name in glaring white letters. I did not pick it up immediately. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, savoring the harsh vibration against the wood, visualizing the absolute chaos currently unraveling on the other end of the line. On the 4th ring, I swiped the green icon, pressed the phone to my ear, and leaned back in my leather chair. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice as calm and smooth as glass. "What kind of incompetent ghetto establishment are you working for?" Kendra Valerie shrieked. Her voice was so shrill, so piercingly frantic, I actually had to pull the phone an inch away from my ear. There was no greeting. There was no asking how my 16-hour flight went, or if I had made it back to Atlanta safely. There was only raw, unadulterated panic. "Excuse me," I asked mildly, staring out at the golden hour sunlight hitting the city skyline. "Do not play stupid with me. I am standing at the checkout counter at Neiman Marcus, and my American Express just declined." Declined, Kendra, in front of the sales associates. She was hyperventilating now, the words tumbling out of her mouth in a furious, ragged rush. "I checked my banking application, and there is a pending charge for $49,000 from Monarch Hospitality Group. Your stupid company just drained my entire credit limit." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The rich, dark roast tasted exceptionally good today. $49,000, I repeated, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. That sounds like a standard final invoice for a luxury event booking. "Did you recently host a large gathering on one of the Monarch properties?" "Are you out of your mind?" my mother screamed. "You know exactly what event I hosted. Your sister's wedding. The wedding you tried to ruin by showing up uninvited in a cheap business suit. I knew your little hospitality job was a joke, but I did not think you all were running a literal credit card scam. They charged me for everything." I could hear the rustling of paper, or maybe her tapping furiously on her phone screen as she read through the digital receipt Malik had just emailed to her. "They billed me $10,000 for the floral arch," she gasped, reading the numbers aloud as if she were reporting a crime. "They charged $12,000 for the premium open bar. They even billed me for the fireworks display over the lake. We had an arrangement, Kendra. We were guests of honor. Someone in your back office completely messed up the billing codes. I listened to her chest heaving through the receiver. The sheer audacity of her entitlement was staggering. Even now, staring at a bill that could bankrupt her, she was deeply convinced that the rules of commerce simply did not apply to her. She honestly believed that because she had played the role of a wealthy aristocrat for 48 hours, the universe owed her a free ride. Mom, I said, keeping my voice even and clinical. When you book a luxury venue, consume their imported champagne, and utilize their staff for 3 days, you have to pay the invoice. That is how businesses operate. I do not want a lecture from a glorified receptionist. She snapped, the venom in her voice returning in full force. You are going to fix this glitch right now. I know you just answer phones and schedule the catering staff, but you need to march your feet down to your accounting department and reverse this charge immediately. Tell them you are the sister of the bride. Tell them it was a clerical error. A clerical error, I echoed. Yes, a clerical error, she insisted, her voice rising to a fever pitch. Jada is in Italy right now on her honeymoon. Preston is already asking questions because the holding deposit alert tripped his bank's security system. Do you understand what you are doing to your sister's aesthetic? Do you understand how humiliating this is for our family? If the Sterlings find out we are dealing with a declined credit card, they will look at us like we are common trash. I swiveled my chair away from the window, resting my elbows on the desk. You mean they will look at you the same way you looked at me at the estate gates? I asked softly. Do not start with your petty jealousies today, Kendra, she hissed. We did what we had to do to protect Jada's big day. You not fitting in with the Charleston elite is your own fault for choosing such a mediocre career path. Now be useful for once in your life and fix your company's mistake. I need a 100% employee discount applied to this invoice immediately, or I swear to God I will drive down to whatever cubicle you work in and make a scene. I let the threat hang in the air for a long moment. I wanted her to feel the silence. I wanted her to hear the absolute lack of intimidation on my end of the line. She was so deeply entrenched in her delusions, so convinced of my inferiority, that she truly believed she could bully me into hacking a corporate billing system to save her social standing. Mom, I said, slowly enunciating every single syllable. There is no glitch in the system. There is no clerical error. Monarch Hospitality Group provided you with a premium 5-star wedding experience. The $49,000 invoice is completely accurate and legally binding based on the contracts you signed. I am not paying this! Valerie screamed, losing the last shred of her carefully curated Southern elegance. I am not paying a dime. We are the family of the bride. You work there. You owe us this. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. The least you can do is comp a venue fee for your own sister. If you do not reverse this charge in the next 5 minutes, I will personally call the corporate office. I will demand to speak to the chief executive officer, and I will have you fired for gross incompetence. The threat of calling the CEO was almost too perfect. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. She was so desperate to wield power over me, so eager to remind me of my supposed place at the bottom of the corporate ladder. She wanted to crush my livelihood just to avoid paying for her own extravagant lies. Are you going to call the corporate office, Mom? I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. I will do it right now, she threatened, her breath hitching. I will ruin your little job. I will tell them you are harassing high-profile clients. Fix it, Kendra. Fix it now. I looked at the silver nameplate sitting on my desk, catching the late afternoon light. It felt as though 35 years of emotional suppression, of biting my tongue, of accepting their casual cruelty and financial manipulation had all been leading to this exact second. I was no longer the daughter begging for a small business loan at a linoleum kitchen table. I was no longer the embarrassment they had to hide from their wealthy in-laws. I leaned closer to the phone, my voice steady, carrying the full, unyielding weight of the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. You do not need to call the corporate office, Mother, I said smoothly, because you are already speaking to the chief executive officer. The silence on the line was absolute. For 5 full seconds, I heard nothing but the faint static of the cellular connection. Then my mother let out a sharp, breathless laugh. It was a sound completely devoid of humor or warmth. It was the sound of pure, concentrated mockery. The chief executive officer, Valerie repeated, Her voice dripped with so much condescension it could have stripped the paint right off the walls. Are you actually having a psychological breakdown, Kendra? Do you hear the delusional nonsense coming out of your mouth? You are a scheduler. You book waiters and arrange tablecloths for a living. Do not sit there and lie to your own mother to cover up the fact that you made a catastrophic mistake at your little job. I leaned back in my leather chair and looked up at the ceiling. It was truly magnificent to witness. Even when presented with the absolute truth, their prejudice against me was so deeply entrenched that their brains literally rejected the information. To them, my success was a physical impossibility, a structural anomaly they refused to compute. Valerie did not wait for a response. She immediately pivoted to her favorite weapon, which was weaponized guilt. "We raised you, Kendra," she shouted, her voice echoing shrilly through the speaker on my desk. "We kept a roof over your head. We fed you. We clothed you when you were nothing but a stubborn, ungrateful child who argued with every single decision we made. And this is how you repay us. By actively trying to destroy your sister's happiness on the most important week of her life." I remained perfectly still, letting her build her own twisted narrative. "Jada is standing on a dock in the Amalfi Coast right now." Valerie cried, her voice cracking with manufactured tears. She and Preston went to rent a private yacht for a sunset tour. She handed the vendor my American Express card because Preston left his wallet at their luxury hotel. And the card declined. It declined in front of a crowd of wealthy European tourists. My daughter was humiliated. She called me sobbing hysterically from Italy. Preston is confused and upset. "You are ruining her honeymoon because you are a bitter, jealous woman." The mental gymnastics required to blame me for Jada's credit card declining were astonishing. Valerie was genuinely trying to convince me that I was the villain for charging them for services they had already consumed. "You could not stand that. Jada married into the Sterling family." Valerie continued, twisting the knife with terrifying ease. "You could not stand that she had a beautiful elite wedding while you are sitting alone in some cheap apartment. So you decided to commit credit card fraud to sabotage her. You owe us this money, Kendra. You owe this family your loyalty. You need to log back into whatever cheap system you use and reverse this charge before you ruin her marriage." Before I could even open my mouth to respond to that spectacular display of gaslighting, the phone fumbled. I heard the sound of the device being violently snatched away. Then my father's deep, booming voice filled the speaker. He used his chest voice, the authoritative, heavy tone he always used to intimidate me when I was a teenager living under his roof. "Listen to me very carefully, little girl," DeAndre growled. "I do not know what kind of ghetto revenge fantasy you are playing out in your head today, but it stops right now. You are going to transfer me to your actual manager. I want to speak to the person who signs your paychecks. Put your supervisor on the phone this instant." I rested my chin on my folded hands. The irony was absolutely exquisite. He wanted to speak to the manager. He wanted to pull rank on me in the middle of my own corporate headquarters. "You are completely incompetent," my father yelled, the anger radiating through the digital connection. "You let your petty jealousy cloud your judgment, and now you have authorized an illegal charge on my wife's card. This is financial fraud, Kendra. Do you understand that? I will call the police. I will drive down to the Monarch corporate office in Buckhead myself. I will walk right past the security desk, find whatever tiny cubicle they have you stuffed in, and I will have you fired and escorted out of the building in handcuffs." I was breathing heavily now, fueled by his own righteous indignation. "You have always been a disappointment." DeAndre spat his words heavy with unfiltered disgust. "Instead of celebrating your sister, you decided to throw a tantrum because we did not want your bad energy ruining the aesthetic of the wedding. We were right to keep you away from the Sterlings. You are a liability. Now do your job, reverse the charge, and beg your manager not to press charges against you for gross incompetence." I let him rant. I sat in my spacious corner office surrounded by imported Italian leather furniture and original artwork, listening to a man who was moments away from total financial ruin call me incompetent. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my honor. I did not try to convince them of my worth. I simply let them exhaust all their ammunition. They were projecting all their insecurities, all their financial desperation, and all their toxic vanity directly onto me. They needed me to be the villain so they could remain the victims. If I was a jealous, incompetent scheduler committing credit card fraud, then they were innocent aristocrats being unfairly targeted. But if I was the successful, wealthy owner of the estate, then they were just broke social climbers who had stolen a $50,000 wedding. They fought tooth and nail to keep the first narrative alive because the second narrative would destroy them. Are you listening to me? DeAndre barked, taking my silence for submission. I said, reverse the charge, Kendra. I picked up my coffee mug, taking my time. The warmth of the ceramic felt grounding against my palms. I looked at the silver nameplate on my desk. I looked at the tablet showing the successful transaction for $49,000. I thought about the 16-hour flight from Tokyo, the shattered crystal vase in the dirt driveway, and the cold look in my sister's eyes when she told them to get rid of me. I am listening, DeAndre, I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet and completely devoid of any daughterly affection. I hear every single word you are saying, but I think you are operating under a massive misunderstanding of how power works in this dynamic. You think you can scream at me and threaten my job to get out of paying your bills. You think you can call me a ghetto fantasy and a liability, and then demand I subsidize your daughter's luxury lifestyle. What are you talking about? My father demanded, his authoritative tone faltering just a fraction. Do not try to change the subject. Put your manager on the phone. There is no manager above me, I replied smoothly. There is no supervisor for you to yell at. You are not going to drive down to Buckhead and have me escorted out of my own building. I told Mom the truth, but since neither of you possess the capacity to listen to me, I will make it abundantly clear for you. I paused, letting the silence stretch out, ensuring they were hanging on my every word. The time for playing the silent, compliant black sheep was permanently over. It was time to completely dismantle their house of cards. I took a slow breath and adjusted the volume on the speakerphone. DeAndre was still breathing heavily on the other end, waiting for me to break, waiting for the familiar sound of his daughter backing down and apologizing for taking up too much space. But that version of me died at the iron gates of the Monarch estate. I want you to pull up the digital receipt Mom was just crying about, I instructed, my voice unwavering. Scroll down to the bottom of the second page. Tell me what you see under the subtotal. I am not playing your little games, Kendra, my father barked. You are going to take this charge off right now. Look at the receipt. DeAndre, I commanded, injecting every ounce of boardroom authority I possessed into those words. For a moment, the sheer force of my tone stunned him into silence. I heard the rustling of the phone changing hands and my mother letting out a frustrated huff as she looked at her screen. It says friends and family waiver revoked, Valerie snapped. It says the promotional discount was manually removed at 12:14 this afternoon. You did this on purpose. You went into the system and took off our discount because you are a spiteful, bitter woman. I did remove it, I confirmed smoothly. I removed it because the system caught a massive discrepancy in the billing profile. You see, Mom, corporate policies are very strict when it comes to authorizing a 100% venue waiver. That specific discount code is reserved exclusively for immediate family members of the ownership group. We are your immediate family, Valerie shrieked, her voice echoing wildly. I birthed you. DeAndre raised you. You are our blood. How dare you sit there and act like we are strangers? Are we family? I asked softly. I let the question hang there, heavy and suffocating. Because 5 days ago, I stood in the Georgia heat after a 16-hour flight. I was holding a hand-blown crystal vase for my sister. I was ready to celebrate her marriage. But you two stopped me before I could even reach the courtyard. I want you to tell me exactly what you said to me. Stop living in the past, my father grumbled clearly, uncomfortable with being forced to confront his own cruelty. We were stressed. We had the Sterling family breathing down our necks. We had an image to maintain. I want you to repeat the exact words you said to me, I pressed, refusing to let him deflect. You are so proud of your decisions, DeAndre. You are so bold when you are protecting Jada. Stand by your words now. Tell me what you said about family. My mother let out a loud, dramatic sigh, playing the role of the exhausted victim. We said only family that fits the aesthetic is allowed today. We told you that you were not invited because you would embarrass us in front of Preston's wealthy parents. There. Are you happy now, Kendra? Does making us say it stroke your fragile ego? Now fix the bill. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the mahogany desk. I am perfectly happy, Valerie, because you just confirmed exactly why you are receiving a $49,000 invoice today. You made it a point to legally, verbally, and physically separate me from this family in front of the estate guards and in front of Jada. You drew a very clear, very permanent boundary. You told me I was not family. You told Preston's parents I was just some charity worker overseas to hide the shame of my existence. You cannot have it both ways. I continued, my voice cold and surgical. You cannot banish me from the property, like a stray dog on Saturday, and then demand I risk my professional livelihood to give you a family discount on Thursday. If I am not family enough to sit in the back row of the ceremony, then you are not family enough to receive a $50,000 corporate write-off. The waiver was revoked because you disqualified yourselves. You vindictive little brat, my father roared. The speaker on my phone actually crackled from the volume of his rage. You are stealing from us. You are trying to bankrupt your own parents just to prove a point. I will sue you. I will sue Monarch Hospitality Group for deceptive business practices. Please do, I challenged instantly. I would love nothing more than for you to hire an attorney and attempt to sue the corporation. Let us take this to court, DeAndre. Let us stand in front of a judge in Fulton County and enter the venue contracts into evidence. Let us look at the liability waivers you signed. Let us review the itemized requests for imported White Orchid's premium champagne and a 7-tier cake. You demanded the absolute pinnacle of luxury. You ordered the most expensive packages available on the property, and you did it all while intentionally humiliating the person you expected to silently foot the bill. We did not expect you to pay for it out of pocket. Valerie cried out, her panic reaching a new chaotic high. We thought it was a corporate perk. We thought the venue just wrote it off. Venues do not just write off $50,000 for fun, Mom. Someone always pays. In this case, you assumed the corporation would just eat the cost because you felt entitled to it. You wanted to sit at the table with the Charleston elite. You wanted to look like old money. But old money pays their invoices. They do not commit credit fraud, and they certainly do not beg a shift manager to illegally hack a corporate server to cover their debts. I am documenting this entire conversation for our corporate legal team, I added, pulling the final thread of their control away from them. I have made a formal record of your threats to come down to my office and cause a scene. I have noted your demands for me to commit corporate fraud. If you step foot anywhere near my building, security will have you arrested for trespassing. If you try to dispute this valid charge with American Express, I will personally send them the signed contracts confirming you authorized every single luxury upgrade for that wedding. The line went completely dead quiet. For the first time in my entire 35 years of life, Valerie and DeAndre had absolutely nothing to say. The air had been completely sucked out of their lungs. They were suffocating under the weight of their own arrogance. They had spent their whole lives treating me like I was small, insignificant, and powerless. They had built their entire identity on the delusion that they were vastly superior to me. But as they stared at that digital invoice, realizing that their credit card was maxed out and their reputation was hanging by a single thread, the truth finally began to penetrate their thick armor of denial. They were not fighting a scared, insecure daughter anymore. They had cornered a ruthless executive who knew exactly how to play the game, and I had just checkmated them. The silence on the line stretched so thin I could practically hear it snapping under the pressure. DeAndre let out a forced guttural laugh. I was trying to regain his footing, trying to drag me back down to the bottom step of the hierarchy where he felt most comfortable. Corporate legal team, he scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual booming resonance. Who do you think you are talking to, Kendra? You do not have a legal team. You are a shift manager. You probably sit in a cubicle farm. Do not throw corporate jargon at me to scare us out of fixing your mistake. I know exactly what you do for a living. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool mahogany of my desk. Do you, DeAndre? Because for the last 10 years, you and Mom have gone out of your way to ignore every single milestone I achieved. You shoved my business plans back in my face. You shushed me at Sunday dinners. So let us finally clear the air. Let us talk about exactly what I do for a living. I do not work in the billing department, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute unshakable authority. I do not hack into servers to steal promo codes, and I certainly do not answer to a supervisor. You demanded to speak to the person who signs my paychecks. Well, you are speaking to her. Stop talking in riddles. Valerie snapped, her panic rising again through the static. What are you saying? I am saying that I am the chief executive officer and sole proprietor of Monarch Hospitality Group, I said. I let the words land heavy and undeniable. I do not work for the company, Mom. I own the company. The entire corporate entity belongs to me. I heard a sharp, ragged intake of breath from Valerie. The line went dead quiet again. That is impossible, DeAndre muttered. It was a weak, reflexive denial. His brain was desperately trying to reject a reality that fundamentally destroyed his superiority complex. I bought the Monarch estate 3 years ago. I continued methodically dismantling their delusion piece by piece. It was my 5th major commercial acquisition. I spent $2 million renovating the grand ballroom where you just danced. I personally approve the Italian marble floors you walked on. I own the luxury catering company that baked Jada's 7-tier gold leaf cake. I even own a controlling stake in the botanical supply firm that imported those blush peonies for your precious $10,000 floral arch. No, Valerie whispered. The word sounded like it had been physically torn from her throat. No, you do not. You live in a cramped apartment. You struggle to pay rent. You are just trying to hurt us. I live in a triplex penthouse in Buck. I corrected smoothly. I drive a car that costs more than your house. My net worth crossed into the 8-figure mark 2 years ago. I am the wealthy elite you are so desperately trying to impress. The sound of Valerie hyperventilating filled the speaker. It was not the dramatic, performative crying she used to get her way. It was the authentic, suffocating panic of a woman whose entire worldview had just been detonated. She had spent a decade treating a multimillionaire like a peasant because her own prejudice had rendered her completely blind. I could hear the rapid, shallow breaths as her mind raced, calculating the sheer scale of the wealth she had just permanently alienated. You lied to us, DeAndre accused. His voice was trembling with a mixture of profound shock and newly ignited rage. You hid this from your own family. You sat there and let us worry about your future while you were sitting on millions of dollars. What kind of daughter does that? I never hid anything, I shot back, my tone turning to ice. I tried to hand you my business plan 10 years ago and you used it as a coaster for your coffee. I tried to tell you about my first commercial acquisition and you told me to stop competing with Jada's entry-level desk job. You chose to be blind, DeAndre. You needed me to be a failure so you could feel successful. You built a massive wall of willful ignorance to protect your fragile egos, and I simply stopped knocking on the door. You let us look like fools, Valerie sobbed, the humiliation fully taking root in her chest. You let us tell the Sterlings you were doing charity work. You let us parade around your property while treating you like a stranger. I let you expose exactly who you are, I corrected. You told the Sterlings I was doing charity work because you were ashamed of honest labor. You thought a hospitality scheduler was too low class for your new aesthetic. If you had just treated me with an ounce of respect, if you had simply sent me a basic invitation to my own sister's wedding, you would have found out that the owner of the venue was sitting in the front row. But you could not do that. Your arrogance would not allow it. Kendra, please, Valerie pleaded. Her tone had completely shifted. The aggressive, demanding matriarch had vanished entirely, replaced by a desperate, groveling stranger. We did not know. If known you owned the property, we never would have treated you that way at the gates. We would have welcomed you with open arms. You have to believe me, sweetheart. That is exactly the problem, Mom, I said, feeling a profound, liberating sense of closure wash over me. You only want to treat me like a human being now because you realize my worth has zeros attached to it. You do not love me. You love the Monarch estate. You love the catering company. You love the empire, but you absolutely despise the woman who built it. We can fix this, DeAndre interjected, trying desperately to pivot to his business voice. It was shaking so badly he could barely form the words. We are still family. We can sit down. We can talk about your portfolio. You are going to need experienced advisors if you are managing assets of this size. I can help you, Kendra. We can keep this wealth in the family. The audacity was breathtaking. Less than 10 minutes ago, he was threatening to have me escorted out of my own building in handcuffs. Now he was trying to pitch himself as my financial advisor. It was deeply pathetic. You are not touching my portfolio, and you are certainly not keeping anything in this family, I said, stripping away the last fragile shreds of their hope. Because there is no family here. You made that perfectly clear when you banished me from the courtyard. But the bill, Valerie wailed, returning to the immediate crisis that was currently bankrupting them. Kendra, we do not have $49,000 lying around. We tapped out our savings to pay for Jada's pageant debts and her designer wardrobe. We put the rest of the wedding costs on credit. If you push this charge through, it will ruin us. The interest alone will drown us. You cannot do this to your own parents. I am not doing anything to you, I replied, feeling absolutely nothing but the cool leather of my chair and the steady, powerful rhythm of my own pulse. I am simply running my business. You consumed luxury services, and now you must compensate the vendor. I gave you the family discount as a wedding gift. You threw it in the dirt at the gates of my property. You wanted to play with the Charleston elite. You wanted the flawless aesthetic. Now you get to pay for it. Valerie began to weep. It was a jagged, ugly sound. Not the delicate, performative tears she used to manipulate her friends at the country club, but the raw, unfiltered sound of a woman realizing her financial ruin was entirely self-inflicted. You cannot do this, she sobbed, the phone clearly shaking in her hand. We will lose the house. We took out a second mortgage just to pay for Jada's custom gown and the first-class flights to Amalfi. We drained the retirement accounts to buy her those diamond earrings. If this $49,000 charge hits our credit report, we are bankrupt. We have absolutely nothing left, Kendra. Nothing. DeAndre snatched the phone back, his heavy breathing filling the speaker. Kendra, listen to me. I am your father. I am ordering you to stop this right now. You are going to log back into that corporate system, and you are going to put that discount code exactly where you found it. You are going to do it because I said so. We can set up a private payment plan with you. We can pay you a few $100s a month. Just clear the invoice with your company so the bank does not freeze our accounts. Your orders hold absolutely zero currency here. DeAndre, I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. You are speaking to me as if we are still standing in that cramped linoleum kitchen in South Fulton. You are speaking to me as if I am still the 25-year-old girl desperate for a $5,000 signature. You have zero authority in my life, and you certainly have zero authority in my corporate headquarters. Monarch Hospitality Group does not offer payment plans to fraudulent accounts. Preston is already suspicious. Valerie cried out in the background, her voice bordering on hysteria. The bank flagged the transaction. If he finds out we cannot afford the venue, he will cancel the down payment on their new house in Charleston. His parents will shun her. You are going to destroy your sister's marriage before it even begins. I am not destroying anything, I stated, gripping the edge of my desk. I am holding up a mirror. Jada chose to build a marriage on a foundation of absolute lies. She allowed you to portray yourselves as wealthy aristocrats to a family of Charleston elites. She demanded a 7-tier cake and imported orchids on a budget that could barely cover a backyard barbecue. Her marriage is built on a financial house of cards, and it is not my responsibility to keep the wind from blowing. She is your sister, Valerie shrieked, the desperation clawing at her throat. She shares your blood. How can you be so incredibly cold? Because I learned from the absolute best, I answered smoothly. You taught me how to be cold. You taught me how to look at a family member who is standing right in front of you, offering you love and support, and treat them like they are completely invisible. You taught me that blood means absolutely nothing when it gets in the way of your precious aesthetic. I could hear the frantic, panicked whispering on their end. DeAndre was muttering something about calling a lawyer, though we both knew he could not afford one. Valerie was hyperventilating, likely staring at the notification on her phone that confirmed her credit limit was completely obliterated. They were trapped. They knew the venue contracts were legally binding. They knew they had joyfully consumed the luxury services. They knew there was no legal loophole that would save them from a bill they had actively accrued. You have to understand the delicate position we were in. My father tried one last time. His voice dropped an octave, attempting to sound reasonable, attempting to sound like a man, negotiating a tough business deal, instead of a man begging for his financial life. The Sterlings are very particular people. They judge everything. We just wanted to make sure Jada had the perfect start in her new high society life. We did not mean to hurt you, Kendra. We just got caught up in the immense pressure of the event. We are asking for grace. Grace. The word hung in the air, heavy and ridiculous. They were asking for grace from the woman they had banished to the dirt driveway just 5 days ago. They wanted grace from the daughter they had spent a decade humiliating and erasing. "You do not want grace, DeAndre," I said softly, leaning closer to the phone. "You want a corporate bailout. You want me to absorb a massive financial loss so you can continue pretending to be someone you are not. You want me to subsidize your delusion." I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute unshakable power of the empire I had built beneath my feet. I thought about the heavy crystal vase I had dropped at the gates. I thought about the careful, quiet way I had logged into my corporate system months ago to apply that waiver, genuinely hoping it would bridge the massive, painful gap between us. I had handed them a $50,000 gift, in total silence, wanting nothing in return but to witness my sister's joy. "I did not come to that wedding to ruin your aesthetic," I said, my tone shifting to a stark, chilling honesty. "I came to celebrate. I brought a hand-blown crystal vase from Japan. It was beautiful, but it was just a distraction." "A distraction?" Valerie echoed, her voice trembling with sudden apprehension. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the vase was just a physical object," I explained, enunciating every word with surgical precision. "The real gift was already applied to your account. I logged into the Monarch corporate server 2 months before the wedding. I pulled up the Sterling and Adams file, and I manually attached a 100% family waiver to your entire invoice." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of two people realizing the catastrophic magnitude of their own arrogance. They had literally turned away the benefactor, who had just handed them a $50,000 lifeline. "I gave Jada a 100% family waiver as my wedding gift." I continued, my voice cold and final, delivering the fatal strike. "But as you and Dad made abundantly clear at the gates, I am not family. You don't get the family discount. The $49,000 is due immediately." I did not wait for the inevitable scream. I did not wait for the begging, the threats, or the apologies they were about to desperately manufacture. I simply removed the phone from my ear, looked at the glowing red button on the screen, and pressed it. The call disconnected. The line went dead. I placed the phone face down on the polished mahogany desk. The sudden quiet of my penthouse office enveloped me, but it was not the lonely, isolating silence I had known as a child in their house. It was the rich, expansive silence of total liberation. I leaned back in my chair, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Atlanta sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of purple and gold. My chest rose and fell in a steady, calming rhythm. The heavy, suffocating weight of their expectations, their judgment, and their conditional love had completely evaporated. I had finally severed the rotten roots that had anchored me to their toxic ecosystem. I had not just matched their cruelty. I had simply held up a mirror and forced them to pay the admission fee for their own grand illusion. I did not have to wait long for the next domino to fall. I turned my chair back toward the center of my office, just as Malik walked through the heavy oak doors holding his silver tablet. He did not say a word at first. He simply walked over to my desk, set the tablet down in front of me, and tapped the screen to wake it up. The glowing dashboard of the Monarch Hospitality Group financial portal was open. A bright crimson banner flashed across the top of the interface. It was a high-priority alert from our merchant services processor. "They panicked," Malik said, his voice laced with dark amusement. "They did exactly what broke people do when they get caught in a financial corner. They called American Express and disputed the charge." I leaned forward, studying the red text on the screen. Valerie and DeAndre had initiated a formal chargeback. The notes from the banking system indicated that the cardholder was claiming the $49,000 invoice was an unauthorized, fraudulent transaction. They had literally accused my corporation of stealing from them. It was a desperate, impulsive move. They were trying to buy themselves time, hoping the bank would freeze the transaction and release the hold on their credit limit before Preston and Jada realized anything was wrong. "They really did not read the contract," I said, shaking my head in genuine disbelief at their sheer financial illiteracy. "They signed a master folio agreement for a luxury estate, and they did not read the fine print regarding dispute protocols. They were too busy taking selfies in the courtyard to read the fine print," Malik replied, crossing his arms. "But the banking algorithm does not care about their aesthetic. It only cares about liability. And right now, their little panic move is triggering a massive cross-contamination protocol. To understand the absolute catastrophe my parents had just unleashed upon themselves, you have to understand how luxury event billing actually works. 6 months ago, when Jada first demanded the Monarch estate for her wedding, Valerie and DeAndre did not have the liquid cash to secure the date. They were barely keeping up with the payments on Jada's designer wardrobe, so Preston stepped in. Preston, the golden boy of the Charleston elite, used his own Platinum Wealth Management card to pay the initial $5,000 holding deposit. He established the master account. My parents could not stand the optics of that. They could not endure the idea of the wealthy white son-in-law paying for the venue while they contributed nothing. So a week before the wedding, Valerie and DeAndre quietly swapped their credit card onto the master folio, officially designating themselves as the primary payers for all final incidentals and remaining balances. They did this with total confidence because they knew the friends and family waiver was sitting on the account. They wanted the aesthetic of being the generous, wealthy providers without actually spending a single dime. But in the world of high finance, linking your credit card to a master folio that was originated by a separate high net worth individual creates a joint liability web. When Valerie called American Express in a blind panic and claimed the venue was committing $50,000 worth of credit fraud, the banking system immediately threw a protective net over the entire master file. The algorithm saw a massive disputed charge tied to an account originated by Preston Sterling. As a standard security measure, the financial institution automatically locked down every single card associated with the event to prevent further fraudulent hemorrhaging. Malik watched the data refresh on the tablet. The merchant bank just flagged Preston's primary accounts, he announced. The security freeze is active. They just locked him out. I sat back in my chair, imagining the sheer, unadulterated chaos currently erupting on the Amalfi Coast. It was late evening in Italy. Jada and Preston were likely sitting in a candlelit five-star restaurant overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. I pictured Preston relaxed and happy, handing his heavy metal card to a waiter dressed in a pristine white jacket. I pictured the waiter returning a few minutes later, leaning down with an apologetic whisper, explaining that the card had been declined. I knew Preston. He was not a man who experienced declined credit cards. He came from a family of strict old money lawyers who managed their wealth with surgical precision. A declined card would not just be an embarrassment for him. It would be an immediate glaring security crisis. I was going to call his concierge line, I said, tracking the sequence of events in my mind. He is going to call his private wealth manager in Charleston to find out why his accounts are frozen while he is traveling internationally. And his wealth manager is going to tell him the exact truth. Malik finished the thought. They are going to tell him that a vendor from his wedding just reported a massive fraud dispute initiated by Valerie and DeAndre. The gravity of the situation was immense. Preston's family did not play games with money. They had an entire family office dedicated to protecting their assets. When Preston made that phone call from Italy, his banker would not sugarcoat the situation. The bank would inform him that his new in-laws were currently claiming that the Monarch estate was running a criminal scam. My parents had just unknowingly accused a multi-million-dollar corporation of theft, and in doing so, they had triggered a financial lockdown on the man they were so desperately trying to impress. They thought disputing the charge would sweep the problem under the rug. Instead, they had just set off a flare gun in the middle of Preston's bank accounts. My phone vibrated on the desk. It was not a call. It was a series of rapid-fire text messages from an unknown number, though the frantic, disjointed typing style gave away the sender immediately. It was Jada. Kendra, what did you do? Preston's cards are not working. The hotel manager just came to our table. We are so embarrassed. Why is the bank saying there is a fraud alert from the venue? Fix this. Fix this right now. Please. I stared at the messages popping up on my screen. The golden child was panicking. The perfect European honeymoon had just slammed into a brick wall of financial reality. She had spent the entire week treating me like a disease, commanding her parents to banish me from the property so my presence would not taint her elite fantasy. Now, sitting in a luxury resort in Italy, with no access to funds, she was begging the sister she had discarded to save her. I did not reply. I simply locked my phone and slid it across the desk. She is messaging me, I told Malik. Preston's accounts are officially frozen. The hotel manager just approached their table in Italy. Malik let out a low whistle. A fraud alert of this magnitude tied to a foreign location means the bank will not just lift the freeze over the phone. They are going to require Preston to verify the venue contracts to clear the security hold. He is going to demand to see the paperwork. Exactly, I said, a cold strategic satisfaction settling deep into my chest. Preston is a lawyer. He does not do glitches. He does not accept clerical errors as an excuse for his assets being locked down on another continent. He is going to investigate. He is going to want to see every single document tied to that master folio. He is going to want to know exactly what his new in-laws are disputing. And when he asks for those documents, he is going to find out what Valerie and DeAndre actually did to secure that venue. He was going to find out that the wealthy, aristocratic family he thought he married into were actually desperate grifters who had just committed a massive financial betrayal against him. The trap had not just snapped shut on my parents. It had dragged their entire facade into the harsh, unforgiving light of day. I sat in the quiet authority of my office watching the Atlanta sky darken into twilight, knowing that the real confrontation had not even begun. The phone was going to ring again very soon, and this time it would not be my mother screaming about a glitch. It would be Preston Sterling demanding the truth. The sharp trill of the private line on my desk cut through the quiet of my office. It was not my cell phone this time. It was the direct corporate escalation line. I glanced at the caller identification display. An international country code flashed on the screen specifically originating from Italy. I looked across the desk at Malik, who gave me a single confirming nod. The Charleston lawyer had officially entered the chat. I pressed the speaker button, keeping my posture perfectly relaxed. Kendra speaking, I said, Chief Executive Officer of Monarch Hospitality Group. How can I help you, Mr. Sterling? Preston did not waste time with pleasantries. He came out swinging with the precision and aggression of a man who billed $1,000 an hour for corporate litigation. I do not know what kind of extortion ring you are running out of your back office, but you have made a catastrophic mistake today, he stated. His voice was remarkably steady, completely devoid of the hysterical panic my mother had shown, but layered with absolute chilling fury. You just attempted to push a fraudulent $49,000 charge onto my in-laws. When that failed, you somehow triggered a global security freeze on my primary wealth management accounts. I am currently sitting in a hotel lobby in Amalfi, unable to clear a dinner tab, because your merchant processor flagged my portfolio for international credit fraud. I have my legal team in South Carolina on the other line. Preston continued, his tone sharp as a scalpel. You have exactly 5 minutes to release whatever merchant hold you placed on my master folio. Reverse the unauthorized charges and provide a formal written apology to my wife. If my accounts are not fully unfrozen by the time I hang up this phone, I will personally file a lawsuit against Monarch Hospitality Group for deceptive financial practices, extortion, and tortious interference. You picked the absolute wrong family to scam. I let his threats wash over the mahogany desk. I understood his anger. From his perspective, he was a victim of corporate theft. He was defending his new bride and protecting his assets. It was almost admirable, really, how fiercely he was protecting the very people who had just thrown him entirely under the bus. Preston, I said softly, stripping away the corporate formality and speaking to him simply as a person. I want you to take a very deep breath. I am not a scammer. I am not extorting you. And I highly recommend you tell your legal team in South Carolina to stand by, because you are going to need them to review the documents I am about to send you. I paused, ensuring he was listening. But before I send them, we need to clear up a massive misunderstanding. You think you are speaking to a random corporate executive. You are not. My name is Kendra. I am Jada's older sister. The line went dead quiet. I could hear the faint sound of Mediterranean wind in the background. Jada's sister, Preston repeated his voice, losing a fraction of its aggressive edge, replaced by utter confusion. Jada's sister is doing humanitarian work in Tokyo. She manages logistics for an international nonprofit. I was in Tokyo managing a corporate acquisition for my real estate firm. I corrected him smoothly. I flew back 16 hours to attend your wedding. I was standing at the gates of the Monarch estate, holding a custom crystal vase. Valerie and DeAndre physically blocked me from entering. They told me I did not fit the elite aesthetic of your family, and they banished me from my own property. I am the sole owner of the venue where you just got married, Preston. Your new in-laws have been lying to you about my identity since the day you met them. I could hear him breathing, the gears turning in his highly educated mind. The confusion was warring with his legal instincts. If you own the venue, Preston said slowly, the lawyer in him analyzing the facts, why is your company charging a $50,000 invoice that was supposed to be covered by the initial deposit structure? Valerie explicitly told me the remaining balance was handled. I am emailing you the master folio right now, I said. I tapped my keyboard, sending the encrypted document file directly to his email address. I gave my parents a 100% family discount as my wedding gift to Jada. I wiped the entire balance clean, but when they disrespected me at the gates and declared I was not family, I revoked the waiver. The invoice is completely valid. They consumed the luxury services. They drank the imported champagne. They owe the money. Even if that is true, Preston argued, his voice tightening with frustration, why dispute the charge? Why trigger a global fraud alert on my accounts? Because they do not have $49,000, Preston, I explained patiently. They are completely broke. They drained their savings to pay for Jada's designer wardrobe and pageant fees years ago. When the bill hit their credit card today, they panicked. They called the bank and claimed my company was committing fraud. But here's the critical part, Preston. I need you to open the file I just sent you. Scroll down to page 4. Look at the liability and damages clause. I listened as he opened the file on his device. When you secure a venue of this magnitude, I explained, the primary account holder must sign a waiver accepting total financial liability for all outstanding balances and property damages. You put down the initial $5,000 holding deposit, which made you the primary account holder. But Valerie and DeAndre swapped their credit card onto the file at the last minute so they could play the role of the generous benefactors. They told you they signed the final paperwork, correct? Yes, Preston muttered, his voice barely a whisper now. DeAndre told me he handled the final liability waivers last Tuesday. Look at the signature line on page 4, Preston, I commanded. Look very closely at who signed the financial liability contract. There was a long, agonizing stretch of silence. I heard the sharp intake of breath through the speaker. That is my signature, Preston said. The shock in his voice was palpable, raw, and completely unguarded. But I never signed this document. I was in Charleston all of last Tuesday handling court appearances. I know you did not sign it, I replied, feeling a twinge of genuine sympathy for the man. Valerie and DeAndre forged your signature. They did not want to take on the legal liability of a $50,000 event. They knew they could not cover any incidental damages or overages. So they forged your name on the contract. They attached their credit card for the optics, fully believing my secret family discount would wipe the balance to zero, and the forged contract would never see the light of day. They dumped the entire legal and financial risk onto you. I let the reality of the crime settle over him before continuing. When they panicked today and reported the final invoice as fraud, the merchant bank immediately pulled the signed contracts to verify authorization. The bank saw your name forged on the liability clause, cross-referenced it with the massive disputed charge, and immediately locked down your entire wealth management portfolio to protect your assets. My company did not freeze your accounts, Preston. Your new in-laws committed felony forgery and credit card fraud, and they used your name to do it. The silence from Italy was deafening. Preston Sterling, the brilliant corporate attorney, the heir to Charleston old money, had just realized he had married into a family of absolute grifters. He had been played. His pristine financial standing had been hijacked by people desperate to project an illusion of wealth they did not possess. Jada Preston's voice sounded distant, echoing slightly, as if he had pulled the phone away from his face. Did Jada know about this? I cannot tell you what my sister knew, I answered honestly. But I can tell you she stood on the steps of my estate, looked me in the eye, and told our parents to get rid of me so I would not ruin her elite aesthetic. She has spent her entire life prioritizing the appearance of wealth over actual integrity. You will have to ask your wife what she knew about the forgery. I am authorizing my legal team to release the hold on the dispute from our end, I told him. Bringing the conversation back to business. We will provide your bank with a formal statement confirming that the card on file belongs to Valerie and DeAndre, not you. Your accounts should be unfrozen within the hour. But Preston Monarch Hospitality Group is still owed $49,000. And I intend to collect every single penny from the people who actually incurred the debt. Send the invoice to Valerie, Preston said. His voice was entirely devoid of emotion now. It was the cold, calculating tone of a lawyer preparing for war. Send it to them. And forward a certified copy of this forged contract directly to my personal email. I need to have a conversation with my wife. The call disconnected. I looked across the desk at Malik. He raised his coffee mug in a silent salute. The truth had finally breached the walls of their carefully constructed fantasy. The golden child was about to face the ultimate reality check, and the illusion of the wealthy, perfect family was burning to the ground. The digital clock on my desk ticked forward. It was morning in Italy now. I could picture the scene with vivid clarity. Preston Sterling, armed with a certified copy of a forged contract, sitting across a breakfast table from the woman who had sold him an absolute lie. By the time the sun rose over Atlanta the next day, the Charleston elite had executed a flawless surgical strike against my family. I did not have to guess what was happening. The fallout was documented through a series of highly formal, intensely aggressive legal emails sent directly to my corporate counsel. Malik walked into my office just before noon carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a thick manila folder. He dropped the folder onto my desk with a satisfying thud. The Sterling family office does not mess around, Malik said, taking the seat across from me. Preston forwarded the forged venue contracts to his father last night. His father is a senior partner at a firm that has been operating since the 1920s. They unleashed their hounds this morning. I opened the folder. Inside was a formal legal declaration from the Sterling Family Trust. It officially severed Preston from any financial liability regarding the Monarch Estate event and confirmed that Valerie and DeAndre had committed fraudulent misrepresentation. But the legal maneuvering was just the beginning. The real devastation was financial. For the past 6 months, Valerie had been bragging to anyone who would listen about the spectacular wedding gift the Sterlings were providing for the newlyweds. It was a pristine $2 million historic home south of Broad Street in Charleston. It was supposed to be Jada's ultimate coronation into high society. The closing was scheduled for the exact day they returned from their honeymoon. The Sterlings had put the money in a holding trust ready to wire the funds. According to the addendums Malik had gathered from our legal correspondence, that transaction was entirely terminated. The Sterling Family Trust had pulled the funds from escrow. The house was gone. The golden ticket was shredded. Old money does not scream over the phone the way my mother does. They do not throw tantrums or threaten to drive down to an office to cause a scene. Old money operates with quiet, lethal precision. The moment Preston's parents realized they were dealing with grifters who were willing to commit felony forgery to maintain a fake aesthetic, they completely cut the financial cord. They realized Jada brought absolutely nothing to the table except liabilities and deceit. My desk phone rang. It was the private line again, but this time the caller identification showed a local Atlanta number. It was DeAndre. I let it ring twice before picking up. Kendra, my father said. His voice was completely hollowed out. It sounded like a man who had just watched his entire house burn to the ground. The Sterlings just called us. Preston's father just called us from South Carolina. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the skyline. And what did the distinguished Mr. Sterling have to say, DeAndre? They canceled the house, he whispered, the devastation evident in every syllable. They pulled the down payment for Jada's home. They told us that if we do not pay your company the $49,000 by the end of the business week, they will personally hand the forged contracts over to the district attorney in Fulton County and press charges for identity theft and credit card fraud. They are going to put us in prison, Kendra. I listened to the defeat in his voice. This was the same man who just 24 hours ago had called my ambition a ghetto fantasy. This was the man who had laughed in my face when I asked for a $5,000 startup loan, but gleefully wrote checks for beauty pageants. It sounds like you have a very busy week ahead of you, I replied, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. I suggest you start liquidating your assets. You have to call them! Valerie wailed, suddenly grabbing the phone from my father. I could hear her sobbing uncontrollably in the background. You have to call the Sterlings and tell them this was a massive misunderstanding. Tell them it was an inside family joke. Tell them we had permission to sign the documents. You are the CEO, Kendra. You can make this go away. If you do not fix this, Jada will have nowhere to live when she gets back to America. Preston's family is treating her like a common criminal. I closed my eyes, marveling at her absolute refusal to accept accountability. She was facing prison time for forgery. Her golden child was currently homeless, and her in-laws were actively threatening prosecution. Yet her first instinct was still to demand that I construct a lie to save her reputation. She wanted me to perjure myself to risk my own corporate licensure and reputation just to maintain her illusion of grandeur. I will not lie to the Sterling family, Mom, I said clearly and firmly. I will not compromise the integrity of my corporation to cover up your crimes. You wanted to sit at the table with the elite. You wanted to play the game. You forged a legal document because you thought you were smarter than everyone else. The Sterlings are simply showing you the consequences of your own actions. We are ruined, DeAndre groaned in the background. The country club, our friends, the entire neighborhood. The Sterlings are going to make sure everyone knows we committed fraud. We will be laughingstocks. I looked at Malik, who was quietly reviewing a quarterly report, completely unfazed by the drama radiating from the speakerphone. My parents were not upset that they had committed a crime. They were not upset that they had deeply hurt their eldest daughter. They were exclusively mourning the loss of their social status. The only tragedy in their minds was that their country club friends would find out they were broke. You ruined yourselves, I said, delivering the cold, unvarnished truth. You spent your entire lives curating a fake image at the expense of your own children. You groomed Jada to be a gold digger instead of an independent woman, and you treated me like dirt because I chose to actually work for my wealth. You traded your integrity for a temporary aesthetic. Now the bill is due. I suggest you figure out how to pay Monarch Hospitality Group before Friday, or I will gladly hand over the security footage from the estate to support Preston's fraud case. I hung up the phone, but the silence did not last long. Less than an hour later, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently across the desk. The caller identification showed an international number. It was Jada. I had not spoken to my sister since she stood on the steps of the Monarch estate and demanded I be removed from her sight. I swiped the screen and answered. Kendra. Jada gasped. She was hyperventilating, her voice completely stripped of its usual pageant queen polish. She sounded like a terrified, desperate child. Preston left the hotel. He packed his bags, called a private car, and left me here in Amalfi. He booked a separate flight back to Charleston. He will not even look at me. I listened to her crying. The contrast between this sobbing woman and the arrogant bride from 5 days ago was sharp. What did you think was going to happen, Jada? I asked, my voice remaining perfectly level. You let Mom and Dad forge his name on a $50,000 liability contract to pay for a wedding you knew they could not afford. You lied to him about your family's wealth. I did not know they forged the signature. Jada sobbed, her breath hitching. I swear to God, Kendra, I did not know. But Preston does not believe me. His parents called him this morning. They canceled the closing on our house. They pulled the $2 million from the escrow account. Preston's mother told me I was a social climbing grifter. She told me I am not welcome at their estate in South Carolina. I have no money, Kendra. My credit cards are maxed out from the wedding prep. The hotel is demanding payment for the rest of the week, and Preston canceled the card on file. I am stranded in Italy. The sheer scale of the devastation was breathtaking. Jada had spent her entire life believing her beauty and her curated aesthetic would guarantee her a life of luxury. She had allowed our parents to groom her into a trophy completely dependent on the wealth of others. Now the wealthy family she had banked her entire future on had swiftly and ruthlessly cut her off, leaving her stranded in a foreign country with absolutely nothing. You built your bed, Jada, I said, offering no lifeline. You watched Mom and Dad humiliate me at the gates of my own property, and you cheered them on. You cared more about impressing the Sterlings than you did about your own sister. Now you get to experience exactly how the Sterlings treat people they consider beneath them. Call Mom and Dad. Ask them to buy your plane ticket home. They do not have the money. Jada wailed, the reality of her situation finally crushing her completely. You know they do not have it. Please, Kendra. I am your sister. You have millions of dollars. You own the venue. Just send a wire transfer so I can get a flight back to Atlanta. Please. I looked out the window at the city I had conquered. I thought about the 16-hour flight from Tokyo. I thought about the crystal vase shattered in the dirt. You should have put a chair out for me at the reception, I replied coldly. Have a safe flight, Jada. I ended the call and blocked the international number. The illusion was completely shattered. The Charleston elites had pulled their backing. My parents were facing felony charges, and the golden child was stranded with a maxed-out credit card. The house of cards had not just collapsed, it had disintegrated into dust. My cell phone buzzed again, this time displaying a local Atlanta area code I did not recognize. I had just blocked Jada's international line, assuming that would temporarily halt her theatrics. But the golden child was nothing if not relentless when her survival was on the line. I answered the call, expecting a local vendor or perhaps a client returning my message. Instead, the unmistakable sound of hyperventilating filled my ear. She had used a wireless internet calling application to bypass my block. You ruined my marriage, Jada screamed. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was raw, guttural, and completely stripped of the delicate Southern belle persona she had spent her entire adult life perfecting. You ruined my entire life, Kendra. Preston will not even look at me. He is packing his remaining bags right now. He told me he is speaking with his family attorneys about an annulment. He said he cannot be legally tied to a family of criminals. I leaned back in my leather chair and listened to her sob. The sound echoed in my spacious office, bouncing off the glass windows. For 29 years, my sister had coasted through life on a carpet of unearned privilege. She had been shielded from every consequence, bailed out of every financial mistake, and applauded for simply existing. Now the real world had finally caught up to her, and she was experiencing the full crushing weight of accountability for the very first time. I did not ruin your marriage, Jada. I replied, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. I did not force you to lie to your husband. I did not tell you to pretend you came from generational wealth. You ruined your own marriage the second you let mom and dad forge a contract for a wedding you knew you could not afford. I did not know they forged his signature. Jada wailed, her voice cracking. I swear to God, I did not know they committed fraud. They told me they had the deposit handled. They told me they had the money. You have to tell Preston I had nothing to do with it. You have to call him and tell him I am innocent. I am not calling your husband to clear your name, I stated flatly. Because you are not innocent. You might not have held the pen that forged his signature, but you are the reason they did it. You demanded a $50,000 wedding. You demanded the imported orchids and the 7-tier cake. You watched mom and dad drain their savings for your pageant dresses and your designer shoes, and you never once told them to stop. You happily consumed everything they stole, borrowed, and forged because you felt entirely entitled to it. Jada let out a wet, desperate gasp. We are sisters, Kendra. We are blood. You are supposed to protect me. You are supposed to have my back. I am stranded in a foreign country. Preston's family just pulled the funding for our house. I have absolutely nothing to my name. You have millions of dollars. You can fix this with a single wire transfer. Where was this fierce loyalty to our bloodline 5 days ago? I asked softly. The question hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Where was your sisterly devotion when I stood at the iron gates of my own estate after a 16-hour flight? I was holding a hand-blown crystal vase I had commissioned specifically for you. I wanted to celebrate your joy. But when you stepped out in your custom gown and saw me standing there, you did not welcome me. You did not protect me. You looked at me like I was an infection, and you hissed at our parents to get rid of me so I would not ruin your elite aesthetic. I was stressed, Jada cried, trying to fall back on her favorite excuse. I was overwhelmed. The Sterling family is so intimidating, Kendra. You do not understand the pressure I was under to be absolutely perfect for them. I just wanted one beautiful day where I felt like I truly belonged in their world. You wanted to belong in their world so badly that you sold your own soul to get there, I corrected her. You allowed our parents to erase my entire existence because my honest labor did not fit your wealthy narrative. You thought throwing me away would secure your place among the Charleston elite. But the elite do not respect liars, Jada. Preston does not want an annulment because of me. He wants an annulment because he just realized his beautiful, perfect wife is a complete fraud. The harsh reality of my words struck her. I could hear her crying slow down, replaced by a cold, bitter realization that her usual manipulations were completely useless. The tears were not working. The guilt-tripping was failing. She was staring at a solid brick wall of my boundaries, and she had absolutely no idea how to navigate a situation where she could not simply cry her way out of trouble. Mom and Dad brainwashed me, Jada said, her tone shifting from desperate victim to vindictive accuser. They raised me to care about these things. They told me that marrying a wealthy man was the only way to succeed. They put this pressure on me. It is their fault I turned out this way. You cannot blame me for how they raised me. You are 29 years old, I reminded her, stripping away her final excuse. You are a grown woman. You do not get to blame Mommy and Daddy for your lack of basic human decency. You love the privilege they gave you. You enjoyed watching them prioritize you over me. You actively participated in my alienation because it made you feel superior. Do not act like you were some helpless captive in their toxic ecosystem. You were the star of the show, and you loved every single minute of it. I took a breath, letting the finality of the moment settle over the phone line. The era of the golden child was officially over. The protective bubble our parents had blown around her had popped, and she was going to have to learn how to survive in the wreckage. So what am I supposed to do? Jada whispered. Her voice was empty, completely hollowed out by fear and defeat. Preston is leaving. The hotel wants my credit card for the remainder of the week, and my accounts are maxed out. How am I supposed to get home? You are going to do what the rest of the world does when they run out of money, I instructed, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. You are going to pack your bags. You are going to go down to the hotel lobby and politely explain your situation to the concierge. You are going to call your parents and ask them to liquidate whatever assets they have left to purchase you a coach ticket back to Atlanta. And when you get back, I continued, outlining the stark reality of her new life. You are going to move back into your childhood bedroom in South Fulton. You are going to update your resume. You are going to go out and apply for a minimum wage retail job because you are going to need every single dollar you can earn to help Mom and Dad pay back the $49,000 they owe my corporation. Because if that invoice is not settled, I will gladly provide the district attorney with the security footage of your parents committing fraud on my property. You are a monster, Jada spat, her voice trembling with raw, unfiltered hatred. You are a cold, heartless monster. I am simply the landlord, I replied smoothly. And your lease is officially up. I ended the call. I did not block the new number. I simply set the phone down on my desk, knowing she would not call back. She had absolutely no ammunition left. The illusion she had dedicated her entire life to maintaining was completely obliterated. I turned my chair and looked out the massive windows of my office. The Atlanta skyline stretched out before me, a sprawling network of concrete, glass, and opportunity. For the first time in my life, I looked at my empire and felt no lingering shadow of my family's judgment. The heavy, suffocating weight of their aesthetic, their demands, and their toxic comparisons had been entirely lifted. I had set my iron boundary, and in doing so, I had finally claimed my peace. The deadline Preston Sterling and his family attorney set was absolute. My parents had exactly until 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon to clear the Monarch Hospitality Group invoice in full. If the wire transfer did not hit my corporate accounts by that precise deadline, the Sterling Family Trust would hand the forged liability waivers directly to the Fulton County District Attorney. The threat of a felony forgery conviction and a lengthy prison sentence is a phenomenal motivator for people who have spent their entire lives terrified of public embarrassment. They had less than 48 hours to produce $49,000 in liquid cash. For people who actually possess the generational wealth they so desperately love, to project that amount would be a minor inconvenience. But for Valerie and DeAndre, whose entire financial existence was a fragile house of cards built on maxed-out credit limits and unpaid pageant debts, it was an insurmountable mountain. They had to act with reckless, humiliating desperation to keep themselves out of a jail cell. The first casualty of their financial reckoning was my father's absolute pride and joy. For years, DeAndre had poured every spare dollar he had into a classic car collection. His prized possession was a fully restored cherry red 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle SS. He treated that vehicle with more respect and adoration than he had ever shown me. He loved parking it at the very edge of the driveway in South Fulton, strategically angled, so every neighbor driving past would see it and assume he was a man of immense success and means. That car was his armor. It was his visual proof that he was superior to everyone else in our zip code. To meet the Friday deadline, DeAndre did not have the luxury of putting the car up for a private auction to get a fair market price. He had to sell it to a cash buyer on 24 hours' notice. I heard through the grapevine of our extended family that he let the Chevelle go for absolute pennies on the dollar to a local dealership owner he previously despised. The psychological devastation of watching a tow truck haul away the physical manifestation of his ego, knowing he was selling it to cover a catering bill for a wedding that had just imploded, completely broke him. His armor was gone. But selling the car was not enough. Even after liquidating the Chevelle and draining the microscopic balance remaining in their savings account, they were still severely short. They had to face the ultimate humiliation for people obsessed with the appearance of wealth. Valerie and DeAndre were forced to walk into their local bank branch, sit across a desk from a loan officer they used to brag to about their elite Charleston in-laws, and take out a second mortgage on their home at a predatory interest rate. They mortgaged the very roof over their heads to pay for imported white orchids that were already rotting in compost bins. They traded their financial freedom for a 7-tier cake they barely even got to taste. The second mortgage meant they were trapped in that South Fulton house, indefinitely crushed under a monthly payment they could barely afford, with absolutely zero disposable income left to fund their country club outings or their expensive Sunday dinners. The aesthetic had financially ruined them. The ripple effect of their downfall caught up to the golden child exactly 2 days later. Jada arrived back in Atlanta on a commercial flight, sitting in a cramped middle seat in coach funded by whatever loose change our parents could scrape together. Preston had moved with the swift, ruthless efficiency of a man protecting a multi-million-dollar trust fund. He had filed for an immediate annulment citing fraudulent misrepresentation. The Charleston elite closed ranks instantly, erasing Jada from their social registry as if she had never even existed. She was completely cut off, locked out of the luxury world she thought she had permanently finessed her way into. Jada dragged her heavy designer luggage up the driveway of our parents' house and moved right back into her childhood bedroom. The same bedroom she had smugly packed up just 2 weeks prior, convinced she was upgrading to a $2 million historic mansion south of Broad Street. Now she was surrounded by the fading pink walls of her teenage years, entirely dependent on parents who were practically drowning in debt because of her extravagant demands. The harsh reality of their new financial bracket meant Valerie and DeAndre could no longer afford to fund Jada's delusions. The days of treating her like a princess were permanently over. The bank needed to be paid. The second mortgage loomed over them every single month. They demanded that Jada contribute to the massive financial hole she had helped dig. For the first time in her 29 years of existence, my sister was forced to actually work for her survival. The girl who had proudly viewed my ambition as a ghetto fantasy, the woman who thought scheduling hospitality staff was beneath her elite status, was forced to apply for a minimum wage retail job to help cover the household bills. I received a text message from a former high school classmate a week later with a candid photo attached. It was a picture of Jada standing behind a cash register at a mid-tier department store in Lenox Square. She was wearing a cheap polyester uniform lanyard with her name printed on a plastic tag. She was folding a stack of discounted sweaters, her face utterly devoid of its usual arrogant shine. She had to clock in. She had to take scheduled 15-minute breaks. Women she used to look down on and mock for their lack of status were now her shift supervisors, ordering her to clean the fitting rooms before the store closed. The tragic irony was poetic. She had sold her soul and her family's financial security for the illusion of high society, only to end up exactly where she started, scanning barcodes for an hourly wage just to help her parents keep the lights on. On Thursday afternoon at precisely 2:15, the notification popped up on the monitor in my office. My corporate accounting team had flagged a massive incoming wire transfer. The funds hit the Monarch Hospitality Group operating account flawlessly. It was a transfer for exactly $49,000 originating from a local bank in South Fulton. I looked at the confirmation screen for a long time. The ledger was officially balanced. The debt was settled. I did not feel the need to call them and gloat. I did not need to send a sarcastic thank you note. The natural consequences of their own arrogance had delivered a far more punishing blow than I ever could have orchestrated manually. They had paid the admission fee for their grand illusion in full, and it had cost them absolutely everything they valued in this world. It was a Tuesday morning when the final ghost of my past decided to haunt my corporate headquarters. The $49,000 wire transfer had cleared just a few days prior, and I was sitting at my mahogany desk reviewing architectural blueprints for a new luxury boutique hotel in Savannah. The dust from the catastrophic wedding fallout had seemingly settled. I was focused entirely on expanding my empire. Then my desk intercom buzzed. It was not my usual executive assistant on the line. It was the head of building security, and his voice was laced with a highly unusual level of tension. He informed me that a woman claiming to be my mother had bypassed the ground floor lobby security desk by tailgating a group of corporate executives into the private elevator bank. She was currently standing in the reception area of my penthouse suite, crying hysterically, and refusing to leave until she spoke with me. Malik walked into my office immediately, having heard the commotion in the outer hallway. He reached into his suit jacket for his phone, fully prepared to call the police and have her removed for trespassing. I held up my hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Let her in," I instructed quietly. Malik gave me a hard look, his protective instincts flaring, but he nodded and stepped back to open the heavy oak doors. Valerie stumbled into my office. The visual contrast between the woman standing before me and the arrogant matriarch who had banished me from the Monarch estate was absolutely jarring. Her carefully curated Southern Belle aesthetic had completely evaporated. She was not wearing her imported pearls or her pristine country club tailored dresses. She wore a wrinkled trench coat over plain clothes. She looked shrunken, visibly aged by the crushing weight of the predatory second mortgage and the brutal social exile she was now drowning in. Her hair was flat and her posture was completely defeated. She began to weep the second she crossed the threshold. These were not the performative, perfectly timed tears she used to manipulate my father or the wealthy Charleston elites. These were the ugly, desperate, ragged tears of a woman who had lost absolutely everything and had nowhere else to turn. "Kendra, my baby," she sobbed, practically collapsing against the edge of my mahogany desk. Her hands were shaking violently as she gripped the wood. "I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry for everything." I remained perfectly still in my leather chair. I did not stand up to comfort her. I did not offer her a tissue. I simply sat and watched her perform, scanning my own body for a reaction. I expected the little girl inside me, the one who had cried over rejected business plans and skipped graduations, to feel at least a microscopic twinge of sympathy. But the emotional vault was completely empty. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just absolute chilling zero. "I was wrong," Valerie wailed, her voice cracking as she leaned over the desk. "Your father blinded me. He was so obsessed with status, and I was so terrified of looking bad in front of his friends. We put so much pressure on Jada because we thought that was the only way our family could succeed. I was foolish. I was so foolish to push you away. You were the brilliant one. You were the one who was actually building something real, and I was too blind to see it." She reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I smoothly pulled it back and rested it on the arm of my chair. Her hand hit the empty desktop. "Please, Kendra," she begged, her tears spilling onto the polished wood. "I will leave DeAndre if I have to. He is broken. He just sits in that house all day, complaining about the car he lost and the bills we cannot pay. I cannot live like this anymore. I just want my daughter back. I want us to have a real relationship. We can start over. I will do whatever it takes to make it up to you. Just please let me back into your life." I looked down at the woman who had birthed me. She was offering to throw her husband away with the exact same ruthless speed she had used to throw me away. Her loyalty was completely transactional. It always had been. She was drowning in the financial wreckage of her own arrogance, and she was desperately grasping at the only life raft she could find in a 50-mile radius. I stood up slowly. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her hysterical, desperate energy. I looked down at her with the cold, immovable weight of the empire I had built entirely without her. "You do not see me, Valerie," I said, my voice ringing with a surgical, unapologetic precision. "You are looking right at me, but you do not see a daughter. You see this mahogany desk. You see the panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline behind me. You see a bank account that is not currently being crushed under a predatory loan." "No, that is not true," she cried, shaking her head frantically. "I see you. I am so proud of you." "You are proud of my capital," I corrected her sharply. "You did not come up to this penthouse because you suddenly developed a maternal conscience. You came up here because your country club friends blocked your number. You came up here because your golden child is scanning barcodes at a cash register to pay for your groceries, and you are absolutely terrified of dying in a house you can no longer afford." She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. The sheer, terrifying accuracy of my statement had paralyzed her vocal cords. She knew I was right. I was stripping away the very last layer of her delusion, leaving her completely exposed to the ugly reality of her own greed. "You spent 35 years making sure I knew I was not good enough for your family," I said softly, delivering the final fatal blow to whatever illusion of a relationship she thought she could salvage. "And you were right. I am not good enough for your family. I am vastly superior to it." I stepped back from the desk, signaling the absolute end of the conversation. I looked her dead in the eye, my face a mask of iron. "You only love me now because you realize my worth has zeros attached to it," I stated with absolute, unbreakable coldness. "The receptionist will validate your parking. Don't come back." Valerie let out a shattered, breathless gasp, as if the air had been physically knocked out of her lungs. She stared at me, her eyes wide with the horrifying realization that her manipulation had completely failed. There was no more guilt to leverage. There was no more filial piety to exploit. Malik stepped forward from the shadows of the room, signaling the security team waiting just outside the doors. 2 guards in dark suits entered immediately. They did not touch her, but their presence was an undeniable command. Valerie slowly pushed herself off my desk. She looked at me one last time, searching for a single drop of mercy, but found a solid wall of ice. She turned around and walked out of my office, her shoulders slumped, flanked by security. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind her, sealing her out of my life forever. The click of the heavy oak doors echoing through my penthouse suite was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the definitive punctuation mark at the end of a 35-year sentence. I stood in the center of my office, listening to the absolute quiet that followed Valerie's departure. The air in the room felt lighter. The lingering toxicity, the stifling pressure to shrink myself, the constant hum of anxiety that had lived in my bones since childhood had completely vanished alongside her. Malik turned to face me. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer unwanted sympathy. He simply walked over to the wet bar, poured 2 glasses of sparkling water, and handed one to me. We raised our glasses in a silent, mutually understood toast. We drank to boundaries. We drank to self-respect. We drank to the empire we had forged from the ground up. I set my glass down on the mahogany desk and powered off my computer monitor. The workday was officially over. I picked up my tailored suit jacket, slipped it over my shoulders, and grabbed my leather briefcase. "Let us go home," I told him. We walked out of the suite side by side, our footsteps synchronized against the marble flooring of the executive corridor. The private elevator arrived instantly. As the doors slid shut and we began our smooth descent to the ground floor, I watched the floor numbers tick downward on the digital display. I thought about the sheer verticality of my life. I had climbed from the suffocating linoleum-floored kitchen in South Fulton to the pinnacle of Atlanta commercial real estate. I had dragged myself out of the shadow of a golden child and built a kingdom where I was the absolute authority. My family had spent my entire life trying to convince me I belonged at the bottom. Today, I had permanently secured my place at the top. The elevator doors chimed open, revealing the expansive, brilliantly lit lobby of my corporate headquarters. The evening security detail stood at attention behind the front desk. They offered respectful professional nods as I walked past. I returned their greetings with a warm smile. This was the family I had chosen. The people who showed up did the work and treated me with the basic human dignity my own blood relatives had weaponized and withheld. Malik and I stepped through the revolving glass doors and out into the warm, vibrant evening air of the city. The sun had completely set, and the streetlights were beginning to glow against the darkening sky. A sleek black SUV was idling at the curb, my driver waiting patiently by the rear passenger door. Malik's car was parked just behind mine. He stopped on the pavement and turned to me, offering a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You did exactly what needed to be done today, Kendra. You cut the dead weight. Do not let a single ounce of guilt try to sneak up on you tonight." "There is no guilt left to feel," I replied, my voice steady and certain. "They spent it all. Have a good evening, Malik. I will see you in the boardroom tomorrow morning." I stepped toward my vehicle. My driver opened the heavy armored door and I slid into the cool, pristine leather interior of the back seat. The door closed with a solid, comforting thud, instantly muting the sounds of the downtown traffic. It was my private sanctuary. I leaned my head back against the headrest, letting the tension drain completely from my shoulders as the SUV merged smoothly into the flow of the city. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my cell phone. The screen illuminated the dim interior of the car. There was one new notification waiting on the lock screen. It was a text message from an unsaved number, but I did not need a caller identification tag to know exactly who had sent it. The arrogant, demanding syntax gave DeAndre away immediately. I unlocked the phone and opened the message. "Your mother has been crying for 2 straight hours. You have completely broken this family, Kendra. I hope your cold money keeps you warm at night because you have absolutely no one else in this world. You are a bitter, lonely woman. When you realize the massive mistake you have made, do not bother coming back to us. You are dead to me." I read the words slowly, letting them process in my mind. 10 years ago, a message like that from my father would have sent me into a devastating tailspin. I would have internalized his cruel assessment. I would have questioned my own sanity, wondering if my ambition really had made me a bitter, unlovable person. I would have drafted a dozen frantic apologetic replies begging for his understanding and desperately trying to repair the bridge he had just burned. But tonight, reading those same toxic words, I felt absolutely nothing but clinical observation. It was the final desperate gasp of a dying patriarchy. DeAndre was stripped of his vintage car, stripped of his phony high society status, and stripped of the daughter he loved to humiliate. He was sitting in a heavily mortgaged house with a wife who only cared about aesthetics, and a golden child who had just been discarded by the Charleston elite. He was projecting his own monumental failures directly onto a text message because he had absolutely no other power left to wield. I was trying to hand me his shame, hoping I would carry it for him. I did not feel the need to respond. I did not need to defend my character or explain my piece. I simply tapped the information icon at the top of the screen. I scrolled down to the bottom of the contact menu. My thumb hovered over the bold red text for a fraction of a second before pressing down firmly. Block contact. A secondary prompt appeared asking me to confirm the action. I pressed confirm. The digital cord severed instantly. The pathway for his toxicity, his manipulation, and his manufactured guilt was permanently demolished. I locked the screen, dropping the phone back into my briefcase and zipped it shut. I turned my gaze to the tinted window of the SUV. The Atlanta skyline rolled past me in a breathtaking display of architectural triumph. The towering glass skyscrapers, the brilliant neon lights, the steady rhythmic pulse of a city that never stopped building. I owned pieces of that exact skyline. I had carved my name into the concrete and steel of this city. I had constructed an impenetrable fortress of wealth, autonomy, and self-respect from the very scraps of discarded potential my family had thrown away. I was not the socially unfit embarrassment they had tried to convince the world I was. I was not the bitter, lonely woman my father had just tried to project onto me. I was Kendra. I was the architect of my own destiny. I was the sole proprietor of a magnificent life. I watched the city lights reflect off the dark glass, a quiet, powerful smile settling onto my face. The heavy, suffocating weight of their expectations had completely lifted, leaving nothing behind but the clean, expansive air of total liberation. I closed my eyes, listening to the gentle hum of the engine, and finally, for the very first time in my 35 years of life, I was completely at peace. The most profound lesson from Kendra's journey is that your worth is never defined by those committed to misunderstanding you. Sometimes the people who share your DNA will diminish your light to protect their own fragile illusions. True family isn't about blood or obligation. It is built on mutual respect and genuine support. Walking away from a toxic environment isn't an act of cruelty, it is an act of radical self-preservation. By setting ironclad boundaries, you stop seeking validation from empty wells and finally claim the peace, success, and liberation you have built with your own two hands. Share your own story of setting boundaries to protect your peace in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button to join a community that celebrates reclaiming your power.